Okay. So, are you driving a man further away out of your life when you really want to bring him closer? That is the topic of today's video. My name is Matthew Coast, and welcome to Commitment Connection. Sorry earlier I was having some technical difficulties if you saw that. And so today we're going to be talking about what drives a man out of your life accidentally. We have a lot of women that are in our community, and they've been asking me all these questions about different things in regards to how they should be messaging men, what's going on with men, talking about some of their interactions with men. And one of the things that keeps coming up is that some of these women are doing things accidentally to kind of push men out of their life. And so we're going to be talking about that today. So we're going to be talking about how to destroy a man's love for you and drive him out of your life. And I've got 5 things that I'm going to be talking about today that women in our community tend to do that will drive a man out of their lives. And so let's get started with number 1. Number 1 is smothering him. So if you're smothering a man, that will definitively drive him out of your life. So what does it mean? What are we talking about when we smother a man? So think about a man's love for you like kind of like a fire, right? You want this fire, this love that he has for you to grow inside of his heart. And when you're building a fire, you kind of have to start it and give it room to breathe and allow it time to build and grow. And if you kind of throw things on top of it, sometimes I've made a lot of different fire. If you've never made a fire before, let me tell you about making a fire. So I've made lots and lots of fires in my life, and sometimes I'll go out with people and we'll build like a fire or something, and people just start throwing tons of sticks and wood and stuff on there, and you have to stop them. You're like, oh, okay, just hold on a minute, right? You have to let the fire breathe. You have to let oxygen come in. You have to let the fire kind of build up and catch momentum before you can really start throwing more wood on there, throwing bigger logs on there, until eventually you have this really big burning fire that is really great and it's really healthy, and there's very little that you can do to actually put it out. And so that's kind of like what you want to think of with a man's love, especially in the early stages of a relationship. You need to give him some room. You need to kind of back off. You need to lean back and allow his desire to grow for you. And one of the things that you've probably heard before, it's kind of a cliche, which is that absence makes the heart grow fonder. And it's true, right? So you need to kind of back off and just kind of lean back and allow him to come to you, especially in the early stages. Later on in the relationship, you can do more things in terms of connecting with him and talking to him and messaging him and all that kind of stuff without really worrying about it, because that fire is already grown and built up and whatnot. And sometimes even if you're in the relationship and you're doing too much and you're trying to make things happen and you're talking, it might be better just to kind of pull back and let him kind of pursue you and do all those things. I had a woman that was in our community who was talking about the last live stream that I did, and she was talking about how I mentioned that even if you're leaning back, you can still kind of reach out to a guy. And she kind of misinterpreted it. What ended up happening was she was talking to this guy, and she told him realized that he needed a little bit of space. Maybe he told her that he needed some space, and so she said, okay, yeah, that's fine, I'll give you some space, just reach out to me when you're ready. And then all of a sudden she watched my video and she's like, oh, I can message him even when I'm leaning back. And so she messages him the next day, right? And she's like, hey, she said something to him, and then he didn't message back, so she sent another message like, hey, are you angry at me, or something like that. And it was like, no, this is the opposite of what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about that. Just because I say that you can reach out to a man when you're leaning back doesn't mean that you should reach out to a man when you're leaning back. And it depends on the situation. So it depends on every situation, and you have to look at your situation individually instead of just saying, oh, Matt said this one thing and I'm going to latch onto it, take it out of context, and just do it whenever I feel like it, because that is not what works. And so, hey, if you're here with us right now, make sure to say hello and tell us where it is that you're watching from right now in the chat. So say hello and say where you're watching from. So the next thing that we're going to be talking about, the number two thing about how to destroy a man's love for you and drive him out of your life is what we were just talking about before as well, which is accusing him of being mad or upset. And so this kind of looks like you constantly asking him how he feels, and if he doesn't say what you want him to say, asking it again, saying it again, asking it again, over and over and over again in different ways possibly. And this is really annoying to a guy. And sometimes guys, like we were talking about before, sometimes guys need some space, and if you're and a lot of times guys need space in order to process feelings, and that might be different than what you need or how you need to be interacted with or communicated with in a relationship or with your friends, or how you're feeling. But it's not always about you and what you want. Sometimes it's about him, sometimes it's about you. It kind of depends on the situation. However, if he is angry and he does need space, it's better to kind of lean back and give him some space rather than accusing him, being on top of him, asking if he's mad or upset over and over and over again, which is kind of a combination of smothering him and the accusing him of being mad or upset kind of thing. So number 3, the third thing that kind of destroys a man's love for a woman is attacking, shaming, or ridiculing him for not doing what you want him to do. And so we're talking about love here, right? And we all want to be loved, and we all want to be accepted for who we are. And when you're kind of attacking a man and shaming him and ridiculing him for not doing or being the way that you want him to be, generally speaking, what a man tends to feel when a woman does that to him is he feels like he's not being seen. He feels like he's not being appreciated. He feels like he's not being loved. He feels like he's being wronged and like he's somehow bad and like you're trying to change him or fix him or do something in order to make him somebody other than who he is. And whenever you do that with a guy, what ends up happening is a guy will do one of two things. He'll either kind of shut down completely and just kind of back away and pull away and be like, because what happens is a lot of times guys will feel like there's nothing that they can do that's good enough, right? Maybe you've heard that before. Guys tend to say that a lot. When I was in the men's dating industry, guys would get into relationships with these women, and that's one of the biggest complaints that they'd have about women that they're in relationships with, is they'd say things like, I feel like nothing I do is ever good enough. And you don't want him to feel that way, because at some point what will end up happening is that he'll kind of give up and he'll just kind of go through the motions, and he'll just accept the fact that you're going to be angry all the time until you blow up and end up leaving because he's not stepping up and he's not giving you what it is that you want, and he feels like he's not good enough for you. You start feeling like you're not good enough for him, or whatever. You start, like, there's all kinds of different things that end up happening from that. The other thing that a guy will do if you shame him, attack him, and ridicule him all the time is he might lash out back at you, and then you'll end up in these anger kind of spouts and arguments and just being mad at each other and whatnot, and that can be really a bad thing overall for everyone. And so the next thing, number 4, or is it 4? Number 4 that we're talking about here is a thing that will destroy a man's love for you and drive him out of your life, is taking over all the male and masculine roles in the relationship until you're pretty much doing everything. So I had a woman the other day that was, I get complaints from women all the time because they talk about how the advice that we give on this channel is too kind of archaic, like it's this old time advice from the 1950s that's trying to get women to be in their place or whatever. And that's not what we're doing at all here. The goal of what we do on this channel and what I do on this channel is really to empower you. It's to give you the tools necessary to create the kind of relationship that you want. And men and women are different. We're different. We're not the same. There's no disputing that. There's biology at stake here, and times might change, and we might try to pretend like we're the same, and we might feel like we want to just be the same, but we're not, right? We have different biology. We have different things. We think differently. We feel differently. We handle conflict differently. Men or women are different. And men are attracted, especially masculine men, are attracted to feminine women. And so what a masculine man wants in terms of being in a relationship and what makes him feel proud to be in a relationship, which is a really important thing for a man to feel, is being able to take over that masculine role and being able to take it over in a way that makes him feel like he's strong and powerful and a man and capable and competent. And if you're taking over all the masculine roles in the relationship, things like planning all the dates, pursuing him, making him a goal or a project or a hobby that you're working on and fixing, or being in charge and all that kind of stuff, if he's a masculine energy man, there's one of two things that's going to happen. Either one, he's going to end up leaving the relationship altogether because he's out there looking for somebody that is a match to him, or two, he's just going to end up leaning back and getting incredibly lazy. And what's going to end up happening then is you're going to be doing everything. You're going to feel like you're giving everything to a relationship and only being taken for granted. And so you don't want to take on the masculine and male roles in the relationship. And I know that can be a very difficult thing, especially in today's age when a lot of women are going into the workplace and taking on masculine roles in the workplace. And in order to thrive and survive and get to higher levels in their work positions, they need to take on these masculine energy roles. However, doing that in your relationship with a masculine energy man can be incredibly destructive and push him away and make him feel like he's not welcome there. So if you're listening and you get what it is that we're talking about, just say, I get it. Just say, I get it in the chat. All right, so the next one is, this is number 5. This is the 5th one, and then we're going to talk a little bit about what it is that you should do and how I'm going to talk a little bit about texting because I was asked about this in the community the other day. And so, and before I forget, if you want to get your questions answered and you want to be a part of our community, go to thegoddesscommunity.com and sign up there, and you can join our community for free. You can get your questions answered by a coach, and you can get a bunch of free, awesome content for signing up. So go there, check it out. It's free for 14 days. There's a free 14 days trial, and all the information is there. So that's that. So number 5 is making him feel lots of negative emotions around you and associated with you. And so there's been a whole bunch of different studies done, and one of the most powerful studies that was done was by the Relationship Research Institute in regards to what keeps two people together over a long-term period of time. And so what they ended up being able to figure out was they studied all these different components, everything you can possibly think of that's going on between a man and a woman, and they could figure out just by putting a man and a woman in a room together for 10 minutes how long their relationship was going to last, and if it was going to last, and if they were going to break up. And they were able to do this with something like 90% accuracy. And one of the number one thing that they talked about in this was the ratio between positive and negative emotions in your relationship that you're experiencing. And what they found is that there has to be at least 5 times as many positive emotions in a person's interaction with their partner in order for those two people to want to stay together. And so when you start having all these negative emotions that start creeping into the relationship and it starts getting out of hand, and next thing you know that the entire relationship's based around negative emotions, what ends up happening is that both people start feeling really bad about things, and many times both of them end up wanting to leave and all that kind of stuff. And so you don't want to, what you want to do is avoid those negative, having tons and tons of negative emotions. Obviously, negativity isn't necessarily something that you can avoid. All relationships have problems. However, things that you want to do is avoid arguing all the time. A lot of couples end up getting into these kind of these patterns of like arguing all the time, and a lot of times what this ends up coming from is people's parents. So if you grew up in an environment where your parents were arguing all the time in order to resolve their conflicts and shouting at each other and getting mad at each other, and it was just this constant arguing back and forth and pointing fingers and not taking responsibility, chances are that's how you're going to experience your relationships in the future. You're going to treat your relationships where you start arguing, and if you get a partner that kind of like sees you arguing and leaves, you're going to be like, what's wrong with him? Right? And you don't even realize that you're the one that's doing all the arguing and starting all the problems and all the drama in the relationship. And so other things that you'll want to avoid in relationship is lying and playing games and trying to manipulate him, making him feel bad about himself, or gaslighting him, or making him feel bad about you not feeling good, which is another topic altogether. But all of these things together, the lying and playing games, manipulating him, ultimately what's going to end up happening is a guy's going to start feeling bad because of those things. When you have a relationship that's based on playing games, the guy ends up feeling really bad. You tend to end up feeling really bad as well if you have a smart guy and he starts playing games with you back, and you end up having this explosive relationship where there's really good sex, but ultimately it ends up exploding and you guys hate each other for the rest of your lives and never want to see each other again. And so you want to avoid that altogether. And so if you're in our chat, yep, Gottman Institute, that's right. So if you're in the chat and you have a question, if you have any questions that you want to ask, make sure to ask the questions, and here at the end, I will answer whatever questions that you guys have. And so lastly, I want to talk about kind of texting, because there is a question in our community about how to text when you're leaning back. And what I want you to do before I kind of give you any techniques around texting in terms of leaning back or being in your feminine energy, which is really what leaning back kind of helps you do, is I want you to kind of think about it or feel it for a moment. And just think about the idea of being feminine, right? Masculine is this thing where it's kind of a doer. You're a doer, you go forward, you're going after goals, you're making things happen, you're fixing things, you're problem solving, you're going after what it is that you want in your life. And the feminine is this receiver. It's this part of you that accepts things in, that blocks things that you don't want, but accepts things that you do want in, and takes in different things. And when you think about texting and think about being in your feminine energy, one of the reasons that we talk about leaning back is because so many women, what they're doing, especially in our community, is they're leaning forward, right? That's why you're smothering a guy, is because you're leaning forward and you're trying to figure out what's going on and is it okay? And I want to make sure that this relationship works, and I want to make sure that he's interested in, that he knows that I'm interested in him, because if he knows that, then, he'll know how much I care about him and he'll want to care about me as well, which, by the way, doesn't work at all. And so, right, or some of the other things that we're talking about, like accusing him of being mad or upset, right? It's kind of like, oh, it's kind of this place of coming from neediness, and then you're then trying to like make things happen, or coming from insecurity, or coming from fear, right? You're afraid that things are going to mess up, or you did mess things up, and so you want to connect with him and find out how he's feeling, and what's going on with you, right? And so what we're talking about here is taking a big deep breath and just being like, right? Just chilling out. Just chill out. Take a chill pill. Relax. Lean back. Get into your feminine energy. Allow the fire to build up. Allow oxygen to go under the fire and for it to build up. And just you lean back and relax and allow yourself to receive. And so coming from this space, thinking about texting with a guy, like what makes sense in terms of texting? How would it make sense to message or text a guy? And so the first thing that I kind of want to talk about is feminine energy in regards to inviting, right? You're this receiver, and there's a way to connect with a man where you're kind of creating an invitation, right? So the feminine is actually the connector, right? The masculine is the pursuer or the doer or the make things happen. So as a man, what a man should be doing when he's connecting with you is figuring out how to kind of move things forward, figuring out how to get you out on a date, figuring out how to what the next step is for your relationship and what it is, and moving things forward in that regard. And your purpose and your kind of position here is kind of as a connector, right? Which is why it's not a bad thing necessarily to connect with him and reach out to him, as long as you're not smothering him or coming from a space of neediness or coming from a space of fear or desperation. If you're not coming from those spaces and you reach out to him and you're coming from your feminine energy, it's totally okay. Right? It's not going to come off badly because you're not trying to do something. You're not trying to make something happen. And so the first technique that I want to talk about is something that I call the breadcrumb trail. And so basically the metaphor that I have for this is taking pieces of bread, and it's like imagine that you're going out and feeding a family of ducks, right? You go out to the park and you see a family of ducks, and you got a loaf of bread with you. And I've I was actually doing this not too long ago, and that's actually why this came to my head. And so you tear off some pieces of bread and you throw it down to the ducks, right? You kind of break it up into really little pieces and you throw it down to the ducks, and they come over and start eating the bread, and you start moving back and you throw a little bit more out to the ducks, and you move back and throw more out to the ducks, right? And you're kind of leaving this, and what you can do is you can just throw a bunch out and just walk off and just, leave a bunch behind you, and the ducks will kind of follow you around. And so that's the idea of the breadcrumb trail. And so there's a lot of different ways to do this and do it coming from kind of a space of being feminine. And one of the ways that you can do this is say something like, hey, I was just thinking about you and wanted to say hi. And so all you're doing here is you're just connecting with him. You're just throwing a piece of bread out there and waiting for him to come over and pick it up and eat it, right? As the good little ducky that he is. And so you're not trying to get him to do anything. You're not trying to force him to say anything or act a certain way. All you're doing is giving him a little bread and seeing if he bites onto it. And if he doesn't bite onto it, that tells you a lot about what's going on with him. If he does bite onto it, that also tells you a lot that's going on with him. And so when you do this, you can't get upset that he didn't message you back right away, right? Like the person that I was talking about earlier did, where she was like, oh my God, he hasn't messaged me. It's like, I don't know how long she waited, but it couldn't have been that long. And she messaged him back like, hey, are you angry at me? You don't want to do that, right? You want to avoid that. Just leave it be. Just let him come over and eat the bread. And if he doesn't, or he does, it tells you a lot about what's going on with him. So So, for instance, if you told him to, another way to do this is if you told him to get a hold of you at some point, just leave him alone. Don't message him. If you said, hey, I get that you need some space, which I've talked to a few women in our community that have done this, where they've been like, the guy's like, hey, I need some space. And she's like, oh, okay, I'll give you some space. Just let me know when you're ready to connect again or ready to talk again, or let me know when you don't need any more space. And then they'll end up trying to reinitiate it a day or two later. And what you need to do is just, like I said, lean back. Just let him contact you. If he doesn't contact you in about 2 weeks, then then go ahead and send him another message. But if it hasn't been 2 weeks, just leave them alone. Just let it go. Just leave them alone. Another kind of thing that I've talked to, that I've seen in our community a lot, is these women where they're like, oh, we had this fun messaging exchange, and then he left for 3 days. Like, why would a man do this? He didn't message me for 3 days, but then he came back, and it's like, 3 days really isn't that long of a period of time. If you feel like you have to connect with him all the time, and like a couple day period of time is a huge period of time for you, you need to start creating more things to do in your life that occupy your time, so that you're not kind of clinging on to a guy. Because if you're just constantly needing attention and connection with him, this, especially early on in the relationship, that can become a really big problem. And so you need to lean back, let him come to you, and just leave him alone. Just let it go. Because it's not normal for everybody to want to talk all the time, especially if a person is really a high value person. They've got a lot of things going on in their life. They might need some space. They might need to only talk twice a week or something like that. And so you want to give them space, especially if they're a high value guy. There's a lot of things going on with them, to just do their own thing, right? And also another thing, and I talked about this in the last live stream, is what the men's dating industry is teaching men about how to connect with women. And one of the guys that I was talking about, or I was talking to a couple weeks ago, was telling me that one of his recommendations is that you, as a man, when you're connecting with a woman, especially in the early stages, that you only contact her once a week. And the only time that you talk to her any more than that is if she contacted you. And so, what guys are trying to do is not screw things up as well, right? Guys are out there and they're having problems as well. And so they've found that when they go and they're really heavy on a girl, a lot of times she'll end up pulling back. And so he doesn't want that to happen. And so a lot of times what guys will do is they'll set a date and they'll just disappear until the date, because they're like, I don't want to screw things up between now and the date. And they know that the more that they talk to you, the higher the probability chance is that they're going to talk you out of the date. And so they kind of avoid talking about the date as much as they can many times, in order to make sure that they aren't screwing things up as well. And so the next part that I want to talk about is the last kind of texting technique, which is it's the invitation part, right? So as a woman, you're receiving, but you're kind of also inviting. And we talked about the breadcrumb trail. This is kind of like the other way to kind of invite a conversation is to, when you message him, is to ask him an actual question. So a lot of times women get confused because they're like, hey, I sent him a message and he just sent me like a 2-word response. And you're like, okay, well, what was your message? And you're like, oh, well, my message was like a 3-word message. And you're like, and it was just a statement. And you're like, oh, well, is this really all that surprising? If you're not, he might be confused. He might not know what's going on, right? Because a lot of guys, especially in America today, they grew up without father figures. They grew up in single-parent households. They grew up in broken homes where their parents didn't raise them or teach them anything at all, especially about dating and relationships. And so a lot of these guys are really confused about what they should be doing, as far as like when you reach out to them, what they should do in order to respond back to you. And so if you want to make sure to kind of give him an invitation for how to respond back to you, ask him a question instead of just sending him a message that doesn't have any necessary response to it. And then again, just looking at his response and gauging that in determination of how he feels about you in the moment. And so that's it for the content right now. Again, I just wanted to mention that if you want your questions to be answered by a coach, go to thegoddesscommunity.com and you can sign up for free, get your questions answered by a coach, and get a bunch of free content that we have there. All the information is over at thegoddesscommunity.com. So now I'm going to check out what everybody is talking about. So Beverly says, I do know a friend and he's okay. That's a horrible. Okay, I'm just not even going to read that one. Okay, so Mima says how to chat or text in a LDR relationship and not smother. Well, again, what you want to do is like we were talking about, lean back, right? Give him space to initiate, give him space to respond, and just allow the conversation to go smoothly. And I've talked to a lot of people about this, and there's kind of this debate, right? There's a debate out there about, do men chase or do women chase? Do men pursue or are women supposed to pursue? And it's not as black and white as men pursue, women don't, women pursue, men don't. There's a lot of give and take, right? In the beginning of a relationship, men are the ones that tend to pursue. And then as the relationship grows, women tend to start doing more of the initiation. Although women can do the initiation from the very beginning all the way up to anywhere in the relationship, as long as she's coming from her feminine energy and she's doing it in an inviting way, it won't end up being a problem. Hello, everybody that's here right now. Hello, Miss Kitty. Hello, Alina, Lorene, Met Monk, Denmark. I love it. Atlanta, Texas. Jennifer, Benita, New Hampshire. Cool. Janice, San Jose. Alina says, don't be clingy. That's right. Don't be clingy. That's right. Lots of people get it. Awesome. Mima says, basically ignore the guy when signs start showing up. No, that is not what I'm saying. It's so funny to kind of give advice out there, because what ends up happening is what I say and what people hear are two completely different things. Nowhere in anything that I've talked about in this entire thing have I ever said ignore a guy in any way, shape, or form. You don't want to ignore a guy. If you ignore a guy, what's going to end up happening is he's going to think that you're not interested in him, and he's probably going to completely leave you alone. Okay, so Met Monk says, I get it, but didn't see the first. Oh. Just go and rewatch the video once we're done here. Priscilla says, so true. Mary says, what to do if your ex-boyfriend's still texting you, but he had already a girlfriend after your breakup, then he's telling you they already broke up, but I don't believe him. Well, you can... if you don't actually believe him and your intuition is telling you that you shouldn't believe him, then you should probably listen to your intuition and, check out the situation for yourself and, see what's going on. Priscilla says, me and my ex-boyfriend had that problem. We're over now. Tina says, a lot of red flags. He's never had me at his place for 4 years. But been at my place all the time. He's divorced. I get calls from other girls. He says it's his ex-wife behind it. Okay. Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting that you've been in a relationship for 4 years and you've never been to his place. I mean, obviously, yeah, that's a lot of red flags. And the question is, why have you been in a situation with a guy for 4 years and he's never had you at his place before? And the other question would be like, what other things is he not doing? Because if he's not having you at his place, there's probably a bunch of other things that he probably isn't doing as well that he should be doing at this 4-year period of time. Number one, if you want a marriage, if you want to get married at some point, being with a guy for 4 years is a long time to not end up getting married to him. And so that's another thing that you will want to think about is going on if you're somebody that wants to end up getting married at some point. So Nicole says, so if you are dating a man and he talks about you dating other guys, what does this mean? Or how do I deal with that if I just want him to know I just want him? Well, so it kind of depends on what you mean he talks about you dating other guys, right? If a guy brings up dating other guys, and it depends on like, how long you guys have been seeing each other. Have you been dating for a long time? Are you in a committed relationship, which it sounds like you're not, right? So if a guy brings up you dating other guys, what's going on in his mind is he's thinking, I need to lock this girl down. Right? That's what's going on in his mind is he's thinking, I want to be in a relationship with this girl. I'm not really sure how to approach the subject. And so I'm talking about and I'm asking if you're dating other guys because I need to know, what this relationship looks like to me. And so what you want to do when a guy does this, if he says like, hey, are you dating other guys? One, you don't want to lie, right? If you are dating other guys, then it's not something that you necessarily need to lie, but it's also kind of none of his business if you're not boyfriend, girlfriend, in a committed relationship exclusive, right? It's none of his business if you're out there dating other guys. And so what you want to do is you want to kind of ask a question, right? Like, and you can kind of do it in a cheeky, fun manner where you're like, if he's like, hey, are you dating other guys? What you might want to say is something like, I don't know, like, are you my boyfriend? Why are you asking about that? Like, do you want to be exclusive with me? Do you want to be committed to me? Do you want to be in a relationship with me? I'm just, and just ask him, like, kind of from that kind of standpoint where, throwing it back in his corner and just being like, well, like, why are you asking me this? Is this because you think that we should be an item right now? Are you saying that we should be boyfriend, girlfriend? Are you saying that you want to be committed to me? You want to be exclusive to me? And just see what he says, because most likely what he wants is that. And he's kind of looking for permission for that, and he's looking for you to say that you want it as well, but you don't want to be the one that says that. You want him to be the one that says it, because then you know where he stands. Right? If you ask him the question and you're like, why are you trying to say that you want to be in a committed relationship with me? You want to be exclusive with me? And he says yes, then all of a sudden you're like, oh, okay, it's not me putting pressure on him to be in this exclusive relationship. He wants that, and now we're having a conversation about it and agreeing to it. So that's how you have that conversation. Shirley says, hey, that's helpful. Well, I'm glad it's helpful. So Shirley says, me out here, thank you for being here. You're welcome. Thank you for being here. I appreciate it. So Tina says, why does he make plans to take me for the weekend? I pack and he never shows. I text him, never can get him till the next day. Yeah, I mean, that's a huge red flag. So Tina, you're the one that's been with him for 4 years. I mean, this guy's showing you all kinds of red flags. You've been with this guy for 4 years. Basically, you're invested and committed to him, and you're in a bad relationship. That's what's going on here. You're in a really bad relationship. Why does he make plans and then not show up? Because he's not a good, strong man with good values and, honest and a man of his word. He's not a good man. And so my suggestion is for you to stop dating him, start dating other people, and get out of a bad situation, or spend some time healing yourself if you feel like you're really hurt right now based on the things that he's done. My suggestion is for you to take your power back. You need to take your power back in terms of your relationship, how you feel towards men. I just did a live stream a couple of days last week. It's called "Make Yourself So Valuable He Will Do Anything for You." Go watch that video. Go watch that live stream and implement everything that I talk about in that live stream. That's what you need to do right now. So Matt Monk says, women need space too. Absolutely. And one of the reasons that we talk about men needing space is because a lot of women in our community tend to get into this space where they're kind of latching onto a guy, but it's absolutely true. Women need space as well, and you need to be able to communicate and pull back if you need space in a way that makes sense as well. DD says, ugh, that's horrible advice for men. It's kind of the same thing that happens with us here with women's dating advice, right? So we tell women to kind of lean back, and what generally ends up happening is sometimes women will end up completely leaning back, but generally what ends up happening is they end up somewhere in the middle because when you tell a woman to lean back and she's leaning forward and she's doing everything, she tends to not actually fully lean back, and what she does is she gets somewhere in the middle. And this happens with a lot of guys as well, is guys will, if I go out on a date with a girl and I have a really great time, and my rule is don't message her but once every week, and I'm just like totally into her, I'm going to be sitting there as a guy, sitting there being like, okay, how much, how long do I have to wait? Has it been, how many days has it been? Oh my God, I gotta message this girl back, but I know that I don't want to screw it up. And then 3 days later, you end up messaging the girl because you're like, okay, I gotta talk to her, and I feel like it's been long enough, right? And so that's a lot of times what ends up actually happening. Although, it works. And the reason that it works is because it kind of puts men back into a power position, right? And it does it for you as well, right? If you're dating a guy and you lean back, we tell you that because it puts you in a power position. It puts you in a position where he's coming to you, right? The men's dating advice is putting them in positions where the women are then chasing the men, and the men are leaning back and letting the women do the pursuing. And so you just need to be aware of the advice regardless of how you feel about it. And I don't particularly like that advice because I think it's off base, especially if you guys have a really strong connection with each other. So Danielle says, I was cheated on by my ex. I gave him space, but he used it to be with another woman. I feel they should stay truthful and faithful. I have trust issues if they don't connect. Yeah, I mean, if a guy's like, hey, I need some space, and you're in a committed, exclusive relationship, and you lean back and give him some space, and he goes off and cheats on you, so there's something going on with him, right? It's not like, oh, there's something wrong with this technique that I did and I leaned back and, he cheated on me. There's something wrong with him, and you lean back and he showed his true colors to you. And as much as it sucks and it hurts, what you want to do ultimately is be grateful that you didn't end up staying with this guy and finding out down the road that he is a cheater and he's going out and hooking up with other women behind your back and you don't know about it. So Billy says, oh, Tina, straight, run away from him. It's a hot mess. It is. That's a very hot mess. And it's very possible that he's married. And you don't want to be a second woman. Tina says, I seen divorce papers, just something not... Yeah, there's something definitely not right about that situation. It's a huge, massive, massive red flag. So Emma says, how to recover being a little clingy and shaming him for a mistake. Just chill out, right? You don't need to recover right? The idea of recovering is another kind of masculine thing, right? You're like trying to fix it. I'm trying to fix this. I want to get to this place where we're okay again. Just chill out, right? If you did something that was really bad and he brings it up and he's like, I don't trust you anymore because of this, and you feel like you actually did something wrong, just own up to it, apologize, take responsibility from it, and just be like, yeah, I'm not going to do that again. And, don't beat yourself up about it by any means. A lot of women tend to do that stuff where they make a mistake and then they beat themselves up for it for days, weeks, months, the rest of their life. And you don't need to do that, right? You just need to chill out and relax and take a step back and focus on creating positive emotional experiences in your relationship. I think that's her name. My says, thanks for the advice. Nora says, how can you tell you can trust a man? Well, you can tell you can trust a man through actions over time. You can't know up front. So for the first at least 3 months, everybody's lazy, right? Everybody's trying to show their best foot, right? They're trying to show who they are and make you like them. And so if you get into a dating situation with a guy and for the first 3 months, he's like doing weird things or whatever, just expect whatever's going on that you don't like in the dating situation after the 3-month period of time to amplify dramatically. And as far as like trusting a guy, you can do things and test him to see if you can trust him, but ultimately that might make him not trust you. And what you need to do is, if you have problems with trust, that's something that you need to kind of build up and work on. And you might want to do that with platonic male friends that you have and other people in your life, and, possibly therapy, possibly doing some kind of seminar, like transformational seminar type work as well. Billy says, Nora, probably when he dead. Yeah. Okay, Stacy says, what if a man you're dating says he loves me sometimes, but says actions speak louder than words? So he says he loves you sometimes? Like, what do you mean he says he loves you sometimes? Like he says that he loves you sometimes, or he says that he loves you sometimes, right? Those are two completely different things. So we could use some clarification on that one. Holly says, I can't find a good man at all. Well, it depends on what you think a good man is, and it depends on where you're looking, and it depends on whether you're projecting or not, which you might be. You might be. So Danielle says, just letting you know that my ex-cheater was my husband for 18 years. It sucks. It sucks. Janice says, is it normal no intimacy till marriage for a 70-year-old man? 15-month it was over. I'm not sure. Is it normal for no intimacy till marriage for many 70-year-old men, they aren't really all that aroused by anything. So they have to take pills and stuff to even get that aroused by anything. So it's absolutely normal that a 70-year-old man will wait and not want any intimacy. Emma says, thank you so much. You're amazing. You're welcome. And thank you so much for being here. Hippie Chick says, difference between being taken for granted and he is not good at communication. Right. So there's a fine line, right? It's hard to know what a man's intentions are, right? And not good at communicating. It's more likely that you're being taken for granted than it is that he's just a bad communicator. It's possible that if he grew up with a dysfunctional attachment style, that he might end up being really bad at communicating just in general. but it's much more likely that it's so communication isn't necessarily being taken for granted. It's kind of an indicator of a person's interest in you, right? So if a man contacts you and you don't message him back for 3 days, most likely it's because you're not really that interested in him, right? So you're just not that into him, and at some point in 3 days you're like, oh yeah, I forgot to message this guy back that wants to take me on a date, and so you send him a message, right? And it's just because you're not interested. And so I'd assume for you that it's the same way with the guy that you're talking to, is that he lost some interest if he's not contacting you back. Now the real question is, what do you mean by, good or bad communication? And so if you're contacting him and he's not responding to you at all, right, that's one thing. And another thing completely, though, is I'm waiting for a guy to message me and I'm not messaging him, but I'm expecting him to message me, right? That's a completely different kind of dynamic than I messaged him and he waited a really long time to message me back. So Alina says, my ex wanted to be friends, which I agreed, but what to do if a guy is getting cold and normal again and again? If he's getting cold and normal, I don't know. So if he's getting cold on you again and again, it depends on what you mean by getting cold on you. Like he's not responsive to you, sending him a message where you ask him a question. Is he, does he try to go out on dates with you? Are you seeing each other? How long have you been seeing each other? Stacy says, yes, he loves me. And he says that he loves me. And you say it all the time. And he says it. But so what you're saying is that he says, I love you sometimes. Like he says it, but he only says it sometimes. So, I wouldn't get too wrapped up in that, right? Like, it's like, okay, what you're doing right now is you're overthinking it, right? Right now, what you're in is this mode of overthinking, like, oh my God, I say that I love him all the time, but he only says it to me sometimes. Like, does he really love me, right? And what that means is that you're coming from a space of fear. Right? You're coming from a space of like, I'm afraid that he doesn't really love me. I'm afraid that what's going on with him isn't what I want to be going on with him. And so what you need to do is just relax, take a deep breath, lean back, watch the last live stream that I did, the one called Make Yourself So Valuable, He Will Do Anything For You. I recommend that everybody that's here right now go and watch that live stream. Because that live stream that's kind of a beginning stage of a really powerful system to empower you in any relationship that you're in. And if you do what I talk about in that video, then the likelihood that you will have a great relationship, the likelihood that you're going to attract a great guy, the likelihood that you're going to get a guy to fall in love with you and fall deeper in love with you, the likelihood that you're going to get and re-attract an ex back into your life that you really want to have, the likelihood that you're going to have a great relationship where you feel in control, where you have a lot of choice, where you feel a lot of freedom, and it is if you do the things that I talk about in the last live stream, the Make Yourself So Valuable, He Will Do Anything For You live stream. So check that one out. So Hippie Chick says, been married to him for 22 years. When will you be home? He answers, when I get there. Where are you? In my truck. Where? Riding down the road. Yeah, so it sounds like what he needs is less, right? So if you're